I didn't feel much like rejoicing this week, and not because our sports teams kind of flopped. The carnage coming out of Israel and Palestine left me feeling anything but joy. It's been doubly difficult because in our polarized environment and in the very complex cauldron of religion, violence, ethnicity, and culture that is the Middle East, it's tough to say anything without offending someone who is currently in pain. Like so many of you, I was stunned by the brutality of Hamas terrorists killing civilians with cold-blooded cruelty simply because they are Jews. Like so many of you, I fear for the future of ordinary Palestinians in Gaza who have been living in an open-air prison, as some have called it, made worse by the oppressive policies of the Netanyahu government, now at the mercy of an Israeli military response that has already killed civilians and is likely to kill more, displacing hundreds of thousands of citizens in the process. Like so many of you, I have long recognized the legitimate aspirations of the Palestinian people and prayed for justice and freedom for Israelis and Palestinians alike, while also recognizing that Hamas offers nothing for the Palestinian people in pursuit of those aspirations. Like many of you, I have lamented the actions of key Palestinian leaders through the years who, when offered a two-state solution worked over by the world's most accomplished diplomats, could not make the transition from opposition leader to founding statespersons. And I have lamented the actions of key Israeli leaders who have fantasized that they could obtain peace through military pressure alone, refusing to negotiate when they should have negotiated. Like many of you, I have worried about the spillover of this conflict into the West Bank, the suspension of an impending peace deal between Israel and Saudi Arabia, which is probably what Hamas set out to do in the first place, and the potential to forget the rest of the world, including Ukraine, caving to the "if it bleeds, it leads" news cycle, which reinforces terrorist activity by giving terrorists the spotlight in exchange for their violence. And like many of you, I have long recognized that the more I've learned about this part of the world, the more I realize how much I don't know. Like one of my friends said, if you travel to Israel and Palestine, as I have done, and you don't come back with more questions than answers, then you're doing something wrong. So we pray. Prayer is a blessing, especially when all other actions seem pointless. I know, thoughts and prayers have been characterized, often correctly, as a way to escape action. But in moments in our lives where the actions aren't clear, prayer is always the way to go. Do not worry about anything, Paul says, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. So we pray for the Israeli families who are grieving this day brutal, incomprehensible losses. We pray for the Palestinian families who are grieving this day the deaths of their loved ones, known to the rest of the world simply as collateral damage. We pray for those whose hearts are so thick with a thirst for vengeance that they cannot see truth or beauty or the shared humanity of the ones they have dismissed so simply as the other. We pray for diplomats and military leaders and relief workers and leaders of world governments whose efforts right now are consequential for the entire world. And we pray for our Jewish and Muslim friends here, some of whom know the dead and grieving, and those who are afraid by blood and by name. Everyone needs an opportunity to lay down their burdens, and prayer is here for all of us. Paul knew something about burdens. He wrote this letter that I just read to you from prison. He had every reason to cry out and lash out. You people think you've had it bad. I could imagine him writing, try staying in a Roman prison. If anyone's got something to complain about, it's me. Instead, he calls them to rejoice and to pray. Rejoice and pray, and there you will find God's peace. That probably sounds about as helpful to us as it did to the Philippians in their day. Though we don't know the details, it's clear that, like many congregations, the church at Philippi had been struggling with how to navigate conflict. Paul says as much, even urging a couple of members of the body to be of the same mind. In the midst of this conflict, Paul urges them to rejoice. Imagine writing to a community that's experiencing the effects of economic distress and telling them to rejoice, or writing to a friend who's lost a job or lost someone they love and telling them to rejoice. Imagine telling a nation weary from war or a planet weary from exploitation, rejoice. And again, I say rejoice. When the world is on fire, we do not expect to be admonished to rejoice. But this week, I focused less on receiving these words as prescriptive for what we are to do, and more descriptive of how totally terror and war robs everyone of the joy we could share and we should share together. War is hell. And because war is hell, there is no joy in it. There may be relief in suppressing your enemy in a battle, but the cycle of retribution that it unleashes or reinforces self-perpetuates. Wars do not resolve conflict. They just transport that conflict into the future. It's only through shared dialogue, negotiated settlements, and honest holding of all wounds that we find a path forward. That's not to say that force is never necessary. You can't have shared dialogue or negotiated settlements when people are holding guns to your head. But as was the case after 9/11, the drumbeat to war drowns out voices that have their eyes set on the prize of peace. That work requires a commitment to the other that is deeper and longer than any war. I think that's why, despite the if it bleeds, it leads news cycle that keeps us focused on the bloodshed, on the wrong, on the hate, on the violence, part of the call of the Christian, and maybe others, is to be working on the things that make for peace all the time. Whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is pleasing, whatever is commendable, think of these things, Paul writes. These are the things we should be filling up our hearts and our minds with all the time, so that when things are fraught, things do get terrible, someone does something terrible in the community, it's truth and honor and justice and purity and neighborliness and goodness that we can draw from, because it's what we've been investing in all along. That kind of investment takes intentionality. Paul knew this. If you want to see justice in our congregation, you got to practice it yourself. If you want to see neighborliness, you got to work on it yourself. If you want to see joy, you've got to bring it yourself, and not just in the times when you expect to draw from it. Let your gentleness or your graciousness be known to everyone, Paul writes. That's an affirmative action. It's not written, don't be mean. Don't be cruel, don't be unkind. It's the affirmative. Make your graciousness known to everyone. Go well beyond the minimum. A lot of our problems in the world derive from the fact that we are way too reactive in our politics and in our communal life together. We let too many problems pile on top of each other before we address them. We respond to conflicts with our own grievances instead of working intentionally to bring about an environment of grace and justice into the mix. We only give grease to the squeaky wheels instead of just giving the extra effort to keep the wheels all lubed up in the first place. And when we only cover the bloodshed in our reporting or consuming of the news, we don't get enough good examples of what letting graciousness be known to everyone looks like. I saw some of that graciousness this past week when the monthly clergy gathering of Build leaders just happened to land in the middle of this violence-torn week. We went around the room and shared our anguish and what brings us hope. The anguish that was named is the violence that threatens to consume all of us and our dreams with it. The violence of Hamas, the violence of the Israeli military response, but also the violence in our own streets. Black clergy closely affiliated with Morgan State lamented the wall that's been proposed on Morgan's campus after the shooting there. The campus has always been open, a porous border between campus and community. Walls have become our solution everywhere. But there we were around tables in a church, at the busy corner of Penn Avenue and North Avenue, ground zero for the protests following the uprising not long ago. There we were, no walls between us, just shared vulnerability at a time when wounds are as raw as they can be. A rabbi shared his pain, the pain of what it means to be a Jew, always looking over your shoulder in a world where some people just want to kill Jews. And the fear of what's coming in the Israeli response from a right-wing government that hasn't served its people well. Rabbi shared that. And the whole group held it, the pain and the fear. An imam shared conversations he was having with young people who have already experienced Islamophobic outbursts from random strangers. The fear of attacks to come in Palestine, yes, but also here. And the whole group held it. The pain and the fear. It was so small as to be inconsequential, not significant enough to be covered by any media, but it is exactly what we need in the world today. People who can hold the pain and the fear with each other. People who can hold each other's experience without running from it or having to destroy it. People who can make just enough room for each other. Maybe that's what peace is. The best part is that you don't have to be a diplomat or a military leader or a relief worker to practice it. It is available to each of us. The possibility for affirmatively engaging in the practices that make for peace each and every day. It can be hard, sacrificial work at times, yes, but Paul knew it as the place where joy is found. So we pray when we don't know what else to do. But as is the case in this passage, our prayers open us to actions that we could not see before. The steps you can take right now, listening to your neighbor's pain and sharing your own, holding space for another, laying the groundwork for peace, one small healing step at a time, rippling out into a sea of hurt and despair.